Okay. So as of late this afternoon, I have what I believe will be our final form of Project 1. So you may download from the assignments the specification JPA final. But as I worked on it, I realized that my table design could have been improved, should be improved for simplicity's sake in terms of the annotations and things like that. So I actually have as well a version 2 of the Club 294 database script. So you want to download that as well, and we will need to reload that database in our MySQL engines. Those were unchanged. Yeah, that we've already implemented the club and the DB util, so we should be good on that score. All right, and we have some functionality left to put, or still to go from last week, because I didn't get quite as far as I had hoped in our work last week. So we'll do that first regarding the member DB class and the member update servlet. I don't think we have an actual way to update our member yet, but let's take a quick look at what I have for you. Oh dear, what is that telling me? Oh, did I leave it that way last week, or is it just telling me something new? Oh, okay, yeah, that's the way I left it, because I have no, that's what you all were going to do for me over the week. So I'll take your discoveries in just a moment. But let's take a quick look at the new final spec. So ClubDB final. And you could probably predict what this is going to be. I just was trying to decide exactly how far we were going to go with Eclipse Link before we moved on to Hibernate, which of course has many similarities. But I also, just to let you know, have come across or come into possession of a new book that's a nice thin little thing called Hibernate, Just Hibernate, from the O'Reilly series, and I'm trying to get through it as quickly as I can to see if it's something I want to use as opposed to a couple of the things we've got already. But I'll let you know as soon as I can. Okay, so we go through our spec, and you've been adding functionality for the add transaction, and then last week we started on our JPA. So the JPA step 1 stuff is all still in place. What we're going to do is extend that now to the transactions. So we're going to have the same kind of implementation, or use the annotations and try to implement on the transaction display the use of JPA for that, but not the add transactions. So I'm not going to go that far, but I did leave that as extra credit. So if you really are wanting to dig deeply into this, you can actually add the JPA technology or techniques for transaction adding, but we're just going to use them for retrieval and display. So we do have the member update that we're going to finish, and then we'll have retrieval and display of the purchase transactions. And I've got some notes there that we'll be working through tonight when we get to it. And that did require redesign of the purchases object that we've got, and the redesign of the database a little bit. And of course we'll have to create a purchase DB to do the retrieval. And the only reason I wanted to go ahead and extend it is that this is a simple one-to-one situation because when you pull a purchase, you have a transaction description which must come along for the ride, and so that lets us link two tables from the database within our JPA structure. Okay. I guess while we're here, let's load the new database. So go ahead and open your MySQL command line client. There it is. And we don't even need to use the Club 294 database because I'm going to change it immediately. Now let's see, I've got to figure out where in the heck this is. So mine I put in C/IS294, so you'll need to identify wherever you dropped the file. And remember that the command is \dot and then the full path. So C for me, C/IS294 and it's now called Club 294 underscore ver2.sql. So Club 294 version 2, there it is, underscore version 2.sql, and I will run it, and I hope it runs correctly. All right. I thought we could have looked at the script for some of the changes, but I'm just going to go ahead and display the table description. So if we now use Club 294, it's still named that, and we show tables, still the same three tables, but the one that changed in this version is the purchases table. So I'm going to describe TBL purchases, and you will see that it now has an auto increment ID field, in other words, a record number of type big int, and that is the primary key. So that was the main change. And if you do a select star from TBL purchases, you will observe that the record numbers are incrementing from 1 to, in this case, 554, but all the other data remains the same. Whoops. Sound okay? Everybody able to load that without problem? No, the database is still the same. So the database name is still Club 294. So if I show databases, it's still Club 294. It's just got a new version of the purchases table inside. All right, well, I wanted you to play around with this JPA query language to see what you could do about a get that instead of using the find based on the primary key would allow us to write a query to do a get. So what do we need here? I tell you what, I'll start you out. The first thing we're going to need is the entity manager. So we'll put that back in there. Anybody like to put yourself on the line for the query itself? All right, let's hear. I called mine, I hope it just doesn't confuse you, just QS, sort of semi-following our Muroc pattern. So what do we got? Okay. Yeah, member M. All right. I'm going to keep this on one visible page. So where memid colon memid. Okay. So tell us about the pieces here. Remember that when you're looking at the JPQL, you have to think in terms of the Java objects, not actual SQL or the database. So the M is the member object. So m.memid equaling colon memid refers to the member ID field in the object. And so what's that final entry there all about? Yeah. Yeah. So it's the parameter. So we're going to tell it to pull based on the mem ID that we send it, and that will be our parameter entry. How many have a query that looks just like that? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. And so again, following our author, we will have a typed query for the member object. I called it Q, and we will need our entity manager to create this query. We'll do a create query, and we use the query string plus the result class, which is member.class. But unless I have a typo, I guess we have an import required. So we're going to add an import for the typed query. All right. And then, who's got something after that? Set the parameter. Very good. You all worked this out with no problem. So Q dot set parameter. The parameter is memid, and the value is memid, which is our method parameter, our method pass. Okay. Well, wasn't too big a problem. I think if we follow the example we have from Muroc, we're going to have a member object M, which I went ahead and initialized to null. And then in a try catch block, we're going to try to do M as the return value of our query Q dot, and this time get single result. And if we catch a no result exception, E, and that needs an import as well, I believe. No result exception. Our author just does a return null right here. I guess we could reconfirm that M is null. Oh yeah, he was writing to the console, which I don't care for. So we're going to have a finally clause to close our entity manager, and then we'll return M. Yeah, so that's probably not necessary, but visually it helps. Anybody see any troubles? Look about right compared to what you've got? Well, how do we implement it? Guess we've got to find wherever it was that we were calling get member by ID and make the appropriate changes. So was that the logon servlet? I put it all at the bottom. And these are all static methods, so we just call them directly. M equal member db.getMember by ID using our user ID. So I'll just leave that comment, or I'll comment that out now, and we'll say M equal member db.getMember by JPQL. Still sending the user ID. Everything else should be the same. We want to authenticate and move on to our member update. I don't have my logon servlet in front of me, but I think that that's all we had to change. So we try it. Let's see. Well, we could just do a Java 2 program instead. How about setting club as the main project? And we'll try again. Now I should get the Tomcat launching and all that other good stuff. Okay, so we're back to our default database, which was had Z005 as 293, and logon says don't crash. Oh, all right. So it has worked. Outstanding. Well, we need to be able to make some changes here to our member data, and I also don't. My member data is not. So, oh, I guess I still have to fix that. I thought I did that. Let's see. Under the member display, I've got a display of the member date for S. So in my member screen, my web page, oh, I didn't fix it. Okay, so we've got the new display field, which is get memdate S on my member date. Okay, so that was my member screen. But what's more important is how we're going to update the member given changes that might be made. And to make this happen, we have to, I'm going to first look at the member DB again, and we'll write, and Murat goes into a fairly decent discussion, I think, of updating, both inserting new, deleting, and merging records, or updating changed records. And so that's what we're going to be doing here. We always have a member that came out of the file already, so we'll be doing a merge. So in my member DB, I'm going to have a public static string. I think I'm returning a message here if something untoward happens. And I just called it UPDT member. I don't really have a good naming convention for this. But the parameter, of course, is member M. So we're going to be given a member and we want the JPA technology to use that member to update the actual data in the database. So let's see, I have a string message, which is going to be my return value. We need our entity manager again. So I'm going to grab that from up above. And that's the object that he kept talking about that you do have to put in each method that uses it. It's the factory that's thread safe, but not the manager. Okay. So we have our entity manager. And what we'll be doing with this process is a transaction. So we're going to have an entity transaction, which I just called trans, as an em.getTransaction. And you want it as a transaction so that you can roll back the process. And this is of course critical if you're doing multiple table updates and only one of them conks out, but you probably want to roll back the entire transaction and see what happened. Okay, so it's an import, I believe, persistence entity transaction. And then you begin the transaction. So trans begin. And you know, I have it in my notes that this was done outside of the try catch, and I honestly don't know if he said why or why that was done that way. Something I'd have to look back at. But in the try catch, our action is to use the entity manager to try to merge object M. So we will do an em.merge. There it is. Merge the state of the given entity into the current persistence context. That sounds so impressive. Basically says, hey, update. Okay, so we're going to merge object M. That's our entity, or our object. Okay. If that is fine and we're still inside the try, we will commit. So we'll do a trans commit. And I just set my message to member updated. But if we catch any kind of exception, then we need to roll back. So trans roll back, and our message is, alas, update error, and there should be something inside the E get message to give us some clue as to what happened. And then don't forget on a finally clause to close the entity manager, and we will return our message. In fact, no, that should be fine. So it should be just that simple, we hope. Yeah. Back into the JPQL. Yeah, there's no comma in the select statement, but make sure you've got spaces around everything so it's not run together. You know, like a space at at the end of our, when I split it into two lines, I needed to make sure that between M and the start of my where keyword, I've got a space. Yeah. The only comma's down in here under the set parameter. Make sure your comma's not inside the quotes. Okay. Well, time to save ourselves some code, right? So if this, in fact, works, our member update should be our member update servlet should be dramatically simpler. Let's take a look at that one. Okay. Obviously, we don't need our JDBC logic, so I'm going to comment that out. I'm not going to delete stuff yet, but comment it out. We're still going to need to get our member and then to let it go through its attempt to update the member object so that code stays in place. And if we get all the way down to, let's see, what did I do? We've got a question of member date. I didn't fix that. Maybe I should leave that for you. So I'm not updating my member date. Remember, we had to switch it to a date type. So maybe that'd be something I could leave for you all to do. Let's keep going. Okay, so here is the if message is empty. In other words, we got through pulling the fields from the form and everything looked okay. And we want to write the data. This is where we can start commenting out again. So I'm going to comment all of this code, all of my nice connection and my prepared statement and everything all the way down to right before the catch. Okay, so this curly brace right before the catch curly brace should be the one for the if message is empty. So I'm going to comment all of that stuff out and then double check, do I have, yeah, so if message is empty, I have nothing currently active in that code block. And what I'm going to put there, if I don't delete things, whoops, ouch, stop that. Okay, so right before that line, yeah, I have a new member object. Updated as N. Yeah, so I guess it's a question of whether we even need to, we set N equal to M and made changes, but I'm not sure that that is really necessary, if that gets us anything. Because they should be pointing to the same spot. But we'll try it. Okay. I'm going to set M back equal to n, just to be on the safe side, even though I think we're already making the updates. And here we go. Remember that our update returns a message string. So I'm going to set the message equal to memberdb dot update member from M. Oh, and there's no SQL exception, direct SQL exception anymore, so those two lines can also be commented on. And we'll just catch a general exception, E, and we'll put message as an attribute on the request object. That stays the same. But here's the only line we need. If this technology really works the way it's supposed to. Well, let's see. Do I actually have an error still, or is it just not cleaning me up properly? Let's see. Nope. The red's gone. Doesn't mean it works, but we can hope. I'm going to try it. I always like to change the middle name to something odd, like Q, and we're going to update the member data. Now it says down below that the member was updated, but I don't believe it. I'm going to go to my MySQL window, and I'm going to use Club 294, and I'm going to select star from TBL members. And lo and behold, Z005, Carl Zimmerman, now has a middle initial of Q. So that's pretty cool. If we go back to the login screen, let's take a look at somebody else. AO43 has a password of 18. We log on, and if we change the password to 180 and update the member, that's the behavior that we had talked about long ago in Java 3 that we're going to accept. Password change, you go back to the login screen. Let's see if 180 is working. Wow, seems to be working. And repeat the TBL members, AO43. Password of 180. So I think it's working. Success? Out there in the real world? Or not? Looks like, do I need to pause for a minute? We will move on to the second part of the specification, or the second JPA, which is going to attempt now to use the JPA technology for the next screen. But to do that, we are going to need to turn the appropriate objects into entities. The first one isn't too hard. It's the what I've called transcode. So if we look at the business object transcode, this is a bean essentially to handle the codes table. So if we describe TBL codes, it's got transcode, transtype, and transdescription. And transcode is a 2-character string which operates as the primary key. Question? Yeah, if you right-click and do the properties, it wouldn't change it. My layout width was 120. Yeah, layout. Yeah, okay. It works now. Oh, you know what? We probably needed to do a refresh on the your browser might have been caching, maybe. Huh. Well, at least it works. Okay, I'll ignore it. Okay. So back to annotations. Transcode will become an entity. We're not actually going to update this entity anywhere, and that'll be a factor in what we do next. But we certainly need it for the retrieval of data. So we're going to have an entity, and the table name in the database is TBL codes. And after we do that, I should have done some imports already. Persistence entity and persistence table. Okay. Now the more I look at examples here and there and everywhere, the more I see the preference for using the annotations directly on the private globals, which surprises me, but we'll do it in the next object. Here I'm still going to go ahead and use annotations on the getter and setter methods. So transcode is the ID, and we're basically doing imports all along here. And the column that it represents in the database is transcd, transcode. And we'll do the import. And then, I'll just do a quick column copy here. For trans type, the column name is exactly that, trans type. Get and set, still string methods. And then trans description, trans DESC, and that should do it. Got the 3 fields, and remember that those come from the names as found in TBL codes. So transcode, transtype, and transdescription. Your which? Oh, yeah, ID for the yeah. Now I had a little issue. Oh, well, wait a minute. This is weird. The object here is purchase. I was looking at an object name on my other machine as purchases. That's odd. Okay, well, we should be all right then. Except that purchase is going to have to be modified somewhat significantly. So a purchase entity, in order to match the table, to have the object relational mapping, if we describe TBL purchases, needs the member ID as a part of its description. And of course, we've now added the primary key just as ID. So we're going to modify purchase.java and do it, and this was just to show the alternative, and do it as a where we annotate the private globals. It was just my choice. So purchase is the entity with a table match to TBL purchases. And we'll do the imports. But now I'm going to add and separate all of these fields. And actually, I may be able to show you something kind of interesting that occurred when I first played with this, having to do with the number format currency object. We'll see. Okay, so let's create a private long, which I'm going to call PID, for purchase ID, because that's now in our table. It's an auto increment. And so this is the ID field. But we need to identify it as a generated value. Now, the strategy that I first put in, which worked, but I think we can do either strategy. But so we indicate, excuse me, strateggy. Strategy equals a generation type of, I think we can do auto. I actually did identity here. So we're telling JPA that this field is auto-generated or is an identity field. So we need an import for the generated value and then an import for the generation type. And I meant to test identity and auto both to see if there was any problem, but we'll do that as we have time. Okay, so we've got a new field, and I as you know, I like to put in the column. So this is an @column name equal ID. Was it both upper and lower, or both? Yeah, both uppercase. And we'll do the import for column. Okay, now we're adding to our class the member ID itself. So we're going to have a private string memID, and we will annotate that as column for memID. Now that D of ID is lowercase. Okay. Separating out the different types. We've got purchase date, but that's, oh, that was going to be private string, sorry. But that's now not going to be a string. It's going to be a date. So private date, purchase date. and we want the Java utility date form there as our import. And we annotate as column name equal purchase date, purchase DT, spelled out in the database. And we need our temporal entry. So at temporal type date. And a couple of imports for that. Temporal and then the temporal type. Now I went ahead and switched this. I have purchase type, but that's really trans type, so I switched that to trans type. Yeah, util, not SQL, but util on the import, right? So that it's java.util.date for the import. Okay, so trans type column is just that. So the column name is now trans type, matches, or the field name matches the column in the database. Now I encountered a couple of problems with the next setup. And I didn't get a chance to play around with this entirely. But here's what we're going to do next. So after trans type, if we're looking at the TBL purchases table, we've got trans code, and that's the connecting field. That's the field that gets us from purchases to the trans code object. Okay, so I did it this way: private string did I transcode or hold on? I'm at a page break. I called it TCD, T code. Whoops, private lowercase p. And this I identified as my column name in the database of trans code. Then I did the amount next. So I'm going to take this artifact out. And my amount column, oops, if I could get my upper and lower case working. You know what? I'll tell you what happened. I may, if I have time at some point, we'll go back and look at this. By leaving the number format currency in this list of annotated globals, I don't know exactly what I did, but it took currency as a field that should have been in the database. So when I actually built the JPQL to retrieve, it was trying to retrieve a field called currency as well. Very interesting. So anyway, I'm going to take this out, number format currency. We only need it one place, so I'm going to do a Control X on that, and it goes down in the amount, the get of the amount. So when we do a get amount call to the Java object, we want to be able to format that for currency. So the gets come back as currency, and we don't, and that's okay now in our object because we're actually using or putting the annotations on the global variables. So I'm just pulling that currency guy out. And here is the great new entry. We're going to connect this entity to the transcode entity by having a private transcode object called transcode. So we're actually going to have the full, so this purchase object has a connection and is essentially has internally the transcode object that it links to. We identify this in two ways. First of all, we're going to do an annotation that says 1 to 1. And Muroc talks about fetch types as being eager or lazy as to when it actually goes and pulls the data. I have not found anything concrete as to a preference, but I'm just going to choose one. So fetch equals fetch type eager, because we're all eager to learn. All right. So we're importing the fetch type, and we are importing the one-to-one annotation from the persistence package. Okay. So this says there's a one-to-one relationship between a purchase entity and the transcode object. And furthermore, we will use a join column description to say that the column that it joins is transcode, but as far as the transcode entity goes, we want insert table false and updatable. Updatable equal false. Okay, so if we pull in the join column import, insert table insertable. Okay, insertable 1T, updatable both false. All right. Right. So the adjoining table will not be updated as a result of changes here. Yeah. Okay, now we need to fix some yes, they should fail if they don't match, which is something we should test. But I guess we have to get it working first. Okay, so in our empty constructor, we've got some new fields. We've got memID to set to the empty string. We've got purchase date, which is now a date, so we'll set it null. Purchase type has been changed to trans type. Whoops, sorry, I already had that. Trans type. Transcode is now not in our. It's T code now, not so. Transcode, the old, is been changed, so the actual transcode field for purchase is called T code now, and the trans description is that joined entity, so you don't need that at all. Amount will be 0, and I don't think we really need to set the purchase ID to 0. That's our auto increment field. Okay. Now, we've got this overloaded constructor, and I guess we should go ahead and maintain it, even though we're not really using it in our application. But I'm going to go ahead and add a string for member ID. Now we've got a date for purchase date, a string, I'm going to change it to T-type, string for TCD, trans description is not needed, double for the amount, and that should do it. So we'll do the same thing again and say that if we're instantiating via this constructor, memID is equal to MID, purchase date, trans type is T-type, TCD is TCD, trans description is not in play. And again, that really won't matter to what we're doing. Okay. So purchase date gets and sets are now date returns. So if we leave them in, we'll end up receiving a date. But I'm adding, just as we did in the member situation, I'm going to add a public string get purchase date S, which will return a new, what do we call it? Simple, I can never remember the name of this thing. It's a simple date format. Yeah, simple date format. Simple date format with DD YYYY using format of this dot purchase date. And we need an import. For simple date format. Okay, so that's for display purposes. Get purchase type is now get trans type, which returns trans type. Set purchase type now becomes set trans type. And I'll just do T-type here. Okay. Transcode is TCD. Now setting the transcode. Oh, back this way. Okay, sorry if I'm getting too far ahead. So we don't, in the rest of this, in all the gets and sets for purchase, we only have to think of what actually has to happen from the management of the object itself, because we're using the annotations directly on the globals. So we can pretty much do anything we want here as far as getting and setting values into those globals. So I'm going to have setting the transcode. We'll set T code. And then we have a fun one. Okay. Is everyone, oh, okay. Still a couple of things to do. Our next question becomes, how do we get the trans description? So if we have it connected now, purchase to transcode table as far as the tables go. But how does our purchase object give up the correct description for trans description, the transaction description? And that's our next method. We are going to return a public string, get trans description, but the return entity is the transcode object. So if we remember that up above, we declared a private object called transcode, which is a type of the transcode.java object. So transcd should give us, so if we return transcd dot, should give us all the methods of the transcd.java class, one of which is to get the trans description. So there's no set on this, so I'm simply going to remove, remember we're not trying to update trans descriptions, I'm going to remove that method altogether. And the get amount and set amounts shouldn't have to change. Well, once again, we've run out of time. But I think we have our purchase.java correctly annotated and modified to link one-to-one relationship to the transcd object. Now we just need to see if we can make a purchase DB that'll actually pull the combined data out of the two tables. So that will be, I guess I'll make it one more week of homework. I'm trying to decide whether I should try and do another. No, I'll give it as homework. See what you can do with that task. So pardon? So here we go. A new Java class in the business package, which will be purchase DB. Like MemberDB, it needs to be able to do the retrieval of the entities, and of course you'll need to do this with JPQL because the primary key on purchase is just an auto increment big int field. So you're going to use the query to pull the purchase and hope that you also get the related transcode object, and for fun, see if you can even sequence your results by the purchase date. The one trick, if you're thinking about Muroc, and here his discussion is not as good, but if you're thinking about what he's got and the relationship here, it's a list. So when we go to pull the purchase objects, it's actually a list of purchases, a list of transactions for the particular member that we have authenticated. So just see what you can do with purchase DB. The show servlet, show purchases servlet will be equally simple once you get a purchase DB class that's operational. So See what you can do with it. We will come back at this point though and work on it, because this is the last part that I need, and we'll call it a completed project after our session next week. And then I'm not too worried about submission dates, but you can figure a week after that roughly. Sorted by date, yeah, ascending sequence by the purchase date. So you're going to retrieve a list, see if you can retrieve it as a sorted list, and then we'll work on getting it displayed in the same way that our purchases display now. All right, thanks very much. We're still making progress, but as I say, I think we're going to move to Hibernate after we're done with this. I don't think I want to go any further with the Eclipse link. But have fun.